Well, good afternoon. Just last month, my wife and I experienced some very serious tragedy within our family. She was pregnant, and we just ended the first trimester. We went to the doctor, paid a visit, and they couldn't find the baby's heartbeat. So they believed our son Regan had passed somewhere around 14 weeks of gestation. And so we took some time to grieve as a family. We took some time to lead our children through that. But eventually we got to the point where we were ready to share this news with others around us. After all, everyone knew we were expecting. And something somebody said that really struck me, because it was very insensitive, but it really points to the culture that we live in. Because this individual said to us in all sincerity, and he thought he was being kind saying it, where he said, well, that was for the best. You losing your son was for the best, because he could have had some type of illness or disease, some type of abnormality. So what happened, actually, it's hard, but it was for the best. And so what he's saying in his statement to us is that if somebody isn't physically or mentally normal, then their life has less value. That was what his statement was saying to us. And ironically in that, this individual was a retired special education teacher from the public school who had dealt with people just like that for the last 30 years. But as I had said already, as hurtful as that comment was, as ignorant as that comment was, we can expect that from the world. We can expect that from people who do not have a foundation of Christ. And that is exactly why we see the culture of death today. So perhaps the most apparent area in our society that we see the culture of death is the area of abortion. In fact, some of us know some of these statistics, but I do want to share some more with you just to see, so you can understand the severity of the issue and what it is we're up against. Since Roe v. Wade, most people would know that we have seen approximately 63 million dead image bearers of God since that unethical, immoral Supreme Court opinion. But here's some more statistics to add to that. So when you balance it out, it comes somewhere along the lines of 1 million per year. On average, in our country, there is around 1,500 to 2,500 per day. So those are abortions per day in our country. Now, that unethical Supreme Court decision fell in June of last year, as we know. And so there was some research done. And according to Pew Research Center, now I want you to keep this number in mind, 62% of Americans still believe that we, or women or mothers, should still have the right to legally abort or terminate their children. So keep that number in mind, 62%, because according to whichever statistic you read, somewhere between 63 to 78% of Americans would identify with the name of Christ, right? Upwards of 78% of people would identify as Christian. So if you think about what I just said, that 62% believe that abortion should still be a quote-unquote legal right, that would mean that nearly most of those people, most of those 62%, would identify as Christian, which should not come as a shock or surprise to us, because it is known that approximately 30% of people or Christians that identify the name of Christ, that they have participated in abortion to some degree. Approximately 1/4 of women have participated in abortion in America by the age 45. And so the number one reason that they give is not those emotional arguments that are given, right? Where those emotional arguments being life of the mother, rape, or incest. That's not the number one reason, but it's income. Income is the number one reason. The reason that they determine to abort or terminate the life of their child is because of income, is because of how much money they make and the size of family. There's a website, which I don't suggest you go to, but it kind of speaks into our culture. It's called Shout Your Abortion. And it reads this: abortion is a normal part of life in every community in America. So what they're saying, if you think of the word abortion, abort means to terminate. So what is it you're terminating? Well, they would say, well, you're terminating a fetus, which is just Latin for small child. By their own admission, is abortion or terminating your child is a normal part of life in every community. But abortion is a normal part of life in every community in America. Sometimes the decision is easy, and sometimes it's not. But you're the only person who knows what's right for you. Now, according to the World Health Organization, there are an overwhelming number of abortions worldwide per year, 73 million. Can't even begin to wrap our mind around that number, 73 million. And according to Statista Research and Development, they polled 27 countries. And out of those 27 countries polled, 59% of the world believes that abortion should be a legal right. So the culture of death is not just prevalent here in America. The culture of death goes beyond the borders of the United States. And that's because it's a sin problem. And keep in mind, and what I'm going to say is going to sting a little bit, but keep in mind, this has all occurred on the church's watch. And Francis Schaeffer has been quoted a few times during this conference, and I'm going to quote him once again, but it's as Francis Schaeffer says, that every abortion clinic should have a sign in the front saying, "Open by permission of the Church of Jesus Christ." But the culture of death is not just in that area of abortion. We see it extend beyond there to other areas of life, and I don't have time to cover everything where we see the culture of death within our society, but I'd like to bring up a few more. Like, we see it in government, for instance. Now, God ordained government. He's given us government, and for a very specific purpose, right? It's supposed to punish evil, it's supposed to enforce contracts, it's supposed to organize national defense. However, government today has turned into the role of provider, business partner, physician, educator, investor, parent, and definer of morality. Ultimately, government is trying to be omniscient and omnipotent, and what they're trying to do is replace God. So if we look at the national debt of $32 trillion. See, government steals and exploits resources, destroys the economy, and makes survival difficult for its citizens. We can look at welfare programs, right? Welfare programs, first off, violate a biblical principle that if you don't work, you don't eat. But beyond that, it's the government rewarding and feeding those who do not contribute to society. It's funded by stealing wealth from families who participate in their God-given right to work. And there's a statistic that I heard recently, as I just talked about the national debt, that since 1965, $25 trillion of taxpayer funds have gone to support welfare programs. If you look at healthcare, government-run healthcare, for instance, right? Maybe you've heard of these quote-unquote death panels, where a team of businessmen and businesswomen, bureaucrats, they get to decide end-of-life care, and they make those decisions not based upon the situation, but based upon expense. If we think of taxes, we think of government and the taxes. Approximately a fourth of our income goes to the government. But beyond that, when we think of that statistic, that would mean more than that's 2 times greater. That's more than 2 times greater than a traditional tithe, right? It's tyranny and it's theft of the ruling officials. It reminds me of the situation in Israel, where Israel wanted to be like the other nations. They wanted a king, and God said, I will be your king. And they said, no, that wasn't good enough. And Samuel warned God's covenant people that what would happen if they got a king. And if we look at this passage right here from 1 Samuel 8, if you will just start in verse 14, where it says, he will take the best of your fields and the vineyards and the olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give them to the officers and to the servants. He will take your male servants and your female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys, and he will put them to work. He will take the 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves, right? He will take, and he will take, and he will take. It will be tyranny, and that's what we see a result of today by our government, and it's a result due to a culture of death. This taking by government officials results in the death and disruption, to say the least, of the nuclear family. And if we talk about education, government-run education, we see the culture of death there because it is the death of knowledge. Proverbs 1 verse 7 reads that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. See, the presupposition of government-run education is there is no God. You don't have to fear him. You can be your own God. And if you start with that as your foundation, it can only lead to death. We see it's something I would agree with that C.S. Lewis has said is that education without values, as useful as it is, seems to rather to make man a more clever devil. But better yet, Jesus says in John 10 that a thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I came that there may have life and have it more abundantly. Life can only be found in Christ. So if we move on from not only abortion in government, but we're looking at the culture of death in marriage. That's what we see around us today, where we look at the whole same-sex union, LGBTQ+, transgender agenda, all of that. We see the culture of death present, where God has gifted us marriage. And one of the reasons he's gifted us marriage is for gospel imitation, for sanctification, and for procreation. And you can see the culture of death creep into all of those areas. For instance, in gay marriage, it kills the picture of the gospel, kills the picture of Christ and his bride. The debauchery of a same-sex union eliminates the opportunity of growth in Christ. It eliminates and kills the opportunity of sanctification. Even procreation, because it is impossible for a same-sex couple to physically procreate. And ultimately, all of this does is kill the nuclear family. The nuclear family is destroyed, communities are destroyed, and once the nuclear family is destroyed, we know what follows. There's poverty, there's crime, there's substance abuse, whether you're talking about some type of Christian literature talking about this or a secular source, all sources agree that when the nuclear family is destroyed, it destroys the community. Also, when we're talking about marriage and the culture of death, the idea that you can prolong marriage or by living together and first establishing a career or financial stability, living together and just have a test run to see if it'll work out, or getting married and not having kids, or just people that just live together for generations, or not for decades, and ultimately what this is, and they agree not to have any kids, and what this does is kill God's design. It promotes self-idolatry, it produces immaturity, and it fails to produce life through the procreation process. It's the culture of death. So, why death in all these areas of life? Because ultimately what it boils down to is sinners trying to kill God. We reject God, and we want to make our own God. We want to make our own idol, whether it's in ourselves or something else. And the irony in the whole thing, the irony in the whole culture of death, as I was describing, is it's a fallen sinner trying to pursue life. And how they try to pursue life is by killing everything around them. They kill the author, sustainer, and creator of life. See, the gospel message is that we can pass from death to life. And we can do that only through grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. The culture of death is the reversal of that gospel message. Proverbs 8:36 tells us that all those who hate me love death. So we see the culture of death, it actually mirrors a culture of irresponsibility. Okay, we think back to Adam in the garden. What happened there? Adam failed to take ownership for his actions and his responsibility. What was his responsibility? His wife and his garden. And what was the result of that? Death. Adam should have done what Jesus did. He should have took his bride who sinned before God and been willing to die in her place. The gospel has been present and has been the only solution since the fall, since death entered the picture. And Romans 1, particularly verse 16, where Paul says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, it is the power of God," right? The power to overcome that culture of death is in the gospel alone. So it can only be overcome, that culture of death, through regeneration. And so what needs to happen is that the church must actively engage in culture in order to deal with the culture of death. And so what that means is we have to get outside of comfortable Christianity and engage the culture of death in abortion clinics and in the political sphere and within our community, within our workplace, because the bottom line is the gospel is the plan. We're plan A. The church is plan A, and we have what the world needs. There is no plan B. And if we are silenced as Christians, as the church, with the gospel, we will never advance and overcome the culture of death. Thank you.